الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. In last week's lesson we were looking at the rules and regulations, the step-by-step guidelines given by the Sharia on what to do when somebody finds a missing object or a lost object. And I mentioned the procedure in terms of making an i'lan, an announcement, how long you have to make this i'lan, an announcement for, and then what to do when after making the announcement, the i'lan, the rightful owner hasn't come forward, then what do you do with that particular item or product? So this was something which was discussed in last week's lesson. Now in this week's lesson, we are going to be touching on three topics. The first topic which I'm going to touch on is with regards to waqf and donating a property or a building or a land for the sake and for the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now according to Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, according to the Hanafi madhab and the Hanafi fiqh, if somebody, say for example, he owns a piece of land or he owns a building and he then makes the intention that he wants to turn this building into a masjid, he wants to turn this building into a khanqah, he wants to turn this building into a markaz or an institution or a yatim khana or a musafir khana or a place where the poor and the needy can stay. Then what happens is that when he makes this intention and then on top of that he puts this intention into practice. Sometimes what happens, people, they have a building, they own a house, they own a particular building, and they make this intention that one day I'll give it to the masjid. The masjid could then use this as classrooms, or that one day I'll turn this into an institution. Now that's the intention you've made, it's good, but you then have to put that into practice. So what I mean by that is that he's made the intention that I'm going to donate this building for the masjid, or that it can be turned into a masjid, and then on top of that he then puts that into practice in terms of he say for example he opens the doors for the public so that they could come and pray namaz, or like for example he separates the entrance and so on. What I'm trying to say is that just by making the intention, that's not sufficient. You have to make the intention, and then on top of that you have to do things which indicates that yes, he's actually donated this particular building for the community, for the Muslims. Now, as I was saying, that according to the Hanafi fiqh, that when somebody makes the intention and on top of that he then makes or puts that into practice, then that property leaves his possession and goes into the possession of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that is what we call a waqf property. A property which is for the community, which is for the Muslims. It doesn't belong to that person anymore, but it now belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why you probably know this ruling, that whenever a building is turned into a masjid, it remains a masjid forever. You can't sell that building afterwards. You can't give it to another organization so that they could turn it into, say, a youth club or a youth center. You will not be allowed to do that, because when something becomes a masjid, it will remain a masjid until ila yawmil qiyamah. It will never change. Why? Because that building is in the possession of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and because you can't buy or sell with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so therefore that building will remain in the possession of Allah, in the ownership of Allah. It will remain his house, it will remain his masjid until the end of time. Now, there is a very famous hadith with regards to waqf properties, or what should a person do. And this hadith can be found in Sahih al-Bukhari, Sunan Nasa'i, and also in this book here, Sunan Abu Dawud. And this hadith is narrated by Sayyidina Umar bin Khattab anhu, that Sayyidina Umar anhu, after the battle of Khaybar, he received 2 lands as mal ganimat, as booty from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the 2 pieces of land he received from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam as mal ganimat, as booty, the name of the 2 lands were called Thamag, and the other one was called Sirma bin Aqwa. So these were the 2 lands he received from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Thamag and Sirma bin Aqwa. Now he comes to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he says to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that, O Prophet of Allah, the 2 lands which you have given me from the mal ganimat, from the booty of Khaybar, they are the most beloved land to me. That's the best, like out of all the possession, these 2 land are the most beloved. Why? Because it was attained after a battle, after a war, and on top of that it was given by you, i.e. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he then asked Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's mashwara, that what should I do with these 2 pieces of land, Thamag and Sirma bin Aqwa, what should I do with it? So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam advised him that you should donate this land for the Muslims, for the Sahabas, i.e. you should give this land for waqf. So Sayyidina Umar anhu, acting upon the mashwara of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he gave the land for waqf and he gave the land for charity. Now, as I said, this is the main hadith regarding waqf, because in this hadith, Sayyidina Umar anhu, he mentioned some rulings with regards to waqf properties, which we can apply even in this day and age. Now, the rulings which Sayyidina Umar anhu then went on to mention, he said, number 1, La yuba'u asluha. That something which is a waqf property, it can never ever be sold. It can never ever be brought. So as I was saying, that when a building is turned into a masjid, it will remain a masjid forever. It can never ever be sold afterwards. You can't sell this building to someone, whether it's another Muslim person, whether you're selling it to another Muslim person with the intention that he's going to keep it as a masjid. Even then, you're not allowed to sell the property. You're not allowed to sell it to non-Muslims. You're not allowed to sell it to any other organization who may turn the masjid into something else. So the first ruling which Sayyidina Umar anhu said was, La yuba'u asluha. That waqf properties, even land as well. Just say you donated some land to the Muslims so that they can in the future make a masjid over this land, or they can use this land to bury their deceased. Even then, that land can never ever be sold. Number 2, wala yuhab. The second rule which Sayyidina Umar anhu gave is that something which is waqf property, it can never ever be gifted. Wala yuhab. You can't give it to someone as a gift. You can't give it to someone as a hadiyah. You can't say that, okay, this building which I owe, I give it to Abdullah or Abdul Rahman as a gift. That would not be allowed. Number 3, wala yurath. That something which is a waqf property, something which belongs to every single Muslim in that community, there is no inheritance of that property. So even though you may one day did own this property, but because you donated this property for the Muslims, you donated this property for a masjid, for a khanqah, for an institution, so therefore when you pass away, your children would not be able to inherit from this property. Because as I was explaining, that as soon as you make the intention coupled with the action, that property does not belong to you anymore. It belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's like your name from this property is totally erased. Obviously, according to the law of this country, you may need to have your name on it. That's different. But between yourself and Allah, in the law, you are not the malik, you are not the owner or the possessor of this property anymore. It belongs to Allah. So therefore, when you do leave this world, none of your children, none of your siblings would be able to inherit from that property. So that's the third thing which Sayyidina Umar anhu mentioned. The fourth thing which he mentioned, he said, La junaha ala man waliyaha ay yakula minha bil ma'ruf. Which means that there is no sin, no guna, for that person who is the mutawalli of that property, who is the zimmadar and the responsible person of that property, to use the property for his benefit bil ma'roof, as long as it is reasonable. Now this is a very important masla, because from here we could derive a lot of modern day rulings. Now the first, or the ruling which I want to mention here is that you get some brothers, and this is the best way to do it, this is the most ahwat and the most taqwa and the most piety way of running a masjid or any other kind of organization, is that you do it fi sabilillah. So you're running the masjid, the paperwork, the admin side, the cleaning, you should do it exclusively for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You don't want to get any money, you don't want to take any kind of money or anything from the masjid. You want to do everything for fi sabilillah. And then say, for example, if you have time, in your free time, you could then be doing some other kind of work, some other kind of like jobs or taxi or something, and you earn your money in that way. But anything which is connected to the masjid, you should do it fi sabilillah. That is the best way. However, for some people that may be a bit difficult, because if they are donating or giving every of their time to the masjid for the cause of the masjid, they may not have time to go for an office job 9 to 5 in the morning. They don't have time to go teaching. They don't have time to do taxis. They don't have time to run a business or to run a takeaway or to run a restaurant. So therefore, Sayyidina Umar bin Khattab has given this guideline, and he said that it is permissible for someone who is a mutawalli, someone who's running the masjid, someone who is running the establishment, someone who's running the organization, to take some money from the property, to take some money from the masjid as his wages bil ma'roof, as long as it is reasonable. Meaning that something which is considered acceptable. So just say, for example, from the masjid donations or from the masjid funds, if he, say, for example, is taking, say, £100 a week for his wages, then if it's something which is reasonable, which he thinks is that, okay, this is sufficient for me to live my life for this week, then he's allowed to take that. There's no sin in taking that. Where there would be sin is if he's taking, say, something more than that. So just for example, £100 is enough for him, but he's taking £200 a week, or he's taking £300 a week, then it will be gунah, then it will be a sin. But something which is reasonable, then for you to take it from the masjid funds or from the masjid donation, then that would be allowed and that would be permissible. Because remember, someone who's working for the masjid, in terms of the admin side and so on, it could be very, very difficult for him, very, very hectic, because he has to give all his time from Fajr all the way till Isha. The entire day is spent with masjid activities. So it may be difficult for him to do some other kind of job on the side. As I said, that the best way is that you do everything for the masjid for free and then have a job on the side where you get your money. However, if that is not possible, then there is no sin, there is no gунah. There's nothing wrong in actually taking money from the masjid funds, from the masjid donations. But the condition, as mentioned, the hadithiyah of Sayyidina Umar bin Khattab anhu, it should be bil ma'roof, something which is reasonable. Not to take too much, but just to take that much which is considered sufficient for that individual and for that person. So that is the ruling with regards to waqf properties and what to do with it. Now, 2-3 rulings I want to mention before we finish this particular topic off. The first ruling I want to mention here is regarding a masjid, and what is a masjid, and all the adabs and the etiquettes regarding the masjid. When do they apply? When does it come into effect? Now remember, there are two words which can be found in the books of fiqh. One is called the word masjid itself, and the second word is in Arabic is called musalla. Now the difference between the two is a masjid is a place where a person or the committee or the trustee, they've made an intention that this place would be a permanent place of worship, and they make this intention that this is going to be the masjid. So as soon as they make this intention, then that particular part of the building automatically becomes a masjid. So just say, for example, the brothers who opened this particular building up here for a masjid. Now, when they've made the intention that this hall is going to be a masjid, so as soon as you make this intention, then automatically this area here is a masjid. Also, on top of that, the area above will become a masjid, and also the area below will become a masjid as well. So as soon as you make the intention that from here to here that is a masjid, then that place will become a masjid. Also the area above, even though there's nothing above, it doesn't matter. If in the future, if you decide to build anything, automatically that area above will be a masjid. Similarly, if there was, say, a cellar downstairs, then if you were to make that cellar into a masjid, so again the area below will automatically become a masjid as well. So that's one ruling. The second ruling is that when it comes to designating a masjid, it is permissible when you are making the intention or when you are drawing the plans to exclude a part of the building from being a masjid. So what you could say is that, okay, from the front door until half of this hall, that is a masjid. But the second half of the hall, we're not going to make it into a masjid. It's going to be classrooms or it's going to be something else. Then that's okay. You're allowed to exclude. When you are making the intention, you can exclude some parts from being the masjid. Even like, say, for example, you made this floor, the ground floor here, a masjid, but then you make an intention that the area above, we're not going to make it into a masjid. We're going to use it as, say, classrooms, or we're going to use it as a female kind of hall where women can go and sit down and so on. So as long as the intention was made from the very beginning to exclude some parts from the masjid, then that would be allowed. Or sometimes what happens is that they make the ground floor a masjid, but then upstairs they say, oh well, that's going to be the imam's room. So the imam will be there, or the office will be upstairs. So these areas would not be considered a masjid. Why? Because you've excluded that. However, when you were making the intention, if you didn't exclude it, then automatically the area above and also the area below, that will become a masjid. Now the reason why it's important to determine what area is the masjid is because all the adabs and etiquettes which are mentioned in the hadith, in terms of you're not allowed to talk about worldly things in the masjid, you're not allowed to, say, for example, urinate or do any feces, or what we looked at, or what you guys know, or what I mentioned in last week's lesson in terms of making an announcement of a lost property or a missing object. These rulings only apply in a Shari'i masjid, a masjid which is Islamically considered to be a masjid. Only the prohibitions and restrictions apply in that particular masjid. If it's a musalla, so a musalla is like, say, a temporary prayer hall or a prayer room, then all the adabs and etiquettes regarding a masjid does not apply there. So in a prayer room, in a temporary prayer room, you can talk about worldly things. There's no gunah, there's no sin in that. In a temporary prayer room, you don't need to have someone doing itikaf. However, when you make a place a masjid, then to talk about worldly things would become unlawful, and to have someone there for itikaf becomes necessary. Otherwise, as we looked at before, the entire community will be considered sinful for not having someone there doing itikaf. So that is the ruling, that when you, at the very beginning, you need to make the intention for the masjid, and you will also be allowed to exclude some parts from the masjid from the beginning, then that is allowed. If you didn't exclude any parts from the masjid, then automatically that building which you intended to be a masjid, also the area above and also the area below, that would also be considered a masjid as well. Okay. Another ruling here, rule number 3, with regards to masjid, is that it is very important that when it comes to a masjid or building a masjid, only halal mal and halal wealth is accepted. That you don't take any unlawful and haram wealth when it comes to building the masjid or when it comes to erecting a masjid. Because if you do take haram wealth, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He does not accept haram, then what would happen is that, fair enough, you may purchase the property, you may say, for example, build the masjid, but the ruh and the barakah of that place would not be there. The ruh and the barakah of a masjid would not be there. It'll go, and it will just be like a normal building. So it is very, very important that when it comes to building a masjid, erecting a place, or any other masjid related activities, it is important that only halal mal and halal wealth is accepted. And I mentioned this before as well, that this is something which even the pagans of Makkah, the Quraysh of Makkah, they did ihtimam of when it came to building when it came to reconstructing the Baytullah. It's mentioned that 5 years before Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's prophethood and nubuwwat, the Quraysh, they got together and they wanted to reconstruct the Kaaba and the Baytullah. So it's mentioned that they did a chanda, they did a collection, and the announcement they were making is that we are only going to accept that wealth which is halal and lawful. And they said that any wealth which is from interest related sources, or any wealth which was gained, say, through alcohol or through by sending their slave girls to go out for prostitution, we are not going to accept that. So that's why it's mentioned in the hadith of Sunan al-Nasa'i that when the Quraysh, when they were building or reconstructing the Baytullah, because they did not have enough money, enough halal money, so do you know the Hatim area, they could not reconstruct that. That's why the Hatim area is just as it is. But the actual Hatim area itself, that is part of the Baytullah. And when Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam, when he made the Baytullah, it was such that he actually included, the building, it went all the way, including the Hatim area as well. But because the Quraysh didn't have enough halal money to reconstruct it all the way to the Hatim, they just left it as it is. So what we can see from this particular story of the Quraysh, that if it means that you don't have enough money to reconstruct the masjid properly, so be it. But make sure you're using halal and lawful money. The idea isn't just to make the masjid fancy, to have beautiful chandeliers and so on. It doesn't matter how we get the money, whether it's from funding, whether it's from haram sources. The main thing is that having the masjid, which is everything, the halal money is used to build that. If that means that the carpets are cheap, if that means that there's no kind of undersoil or undersoil heating or something like that, or under carpet heating, then so be it. It doesn't mean that you get haram money to do those kind of fancy things. Okay, so that is the main lesson which we can learn from the pagans of Makkah. Not from, this is like a story from the pagans of Makkah, that they did so much ihtimam, making sure that the money they used to construct the Baytullah, it was from halal and lawful sources. So that's one topic which I wanted to explain today regarding wealth. The second topic which I want to mention very quickly is regarding what we call in Arabic ghasab. Now ghasab literally means to forcefully take somebody else's property, or to take somebody else's land or any other item, and then on top of that destroying that particular item. Now I'm just going to mention a rule here, and the rule is that, just say for example you've taken somebody's property, whether it was for borrowing purposes or whether it was for amanat, and then that property which you took, or the item which you borrowed, if that perished or if that got destroyed. Now the question is that what would a person do in terms of compensating the individual? Now the scholars have mentioned that there are two types of items. One is called in Arabic misle suri, and the other one is called misle ma'ni. And misle suri are those items where there is an exact replica of the item, meaning that you can find the exact same thing in the shops and in the dukans or in the bazaars. So just say for example this book here, Sunan Abu Dawood. Now you borrowed it from someone, and then something happened, you lost the Sunan Abu Dawud, or the Sunan Abu Dawud, one of your sons, your daughters, they ripped the Sunan Abu Dawud. Now you have to compensate this person and this individual. Now this book, Sunan Abu Dawud, is a misle suri in terms of you could find this particular book in any Islamic bookstores. Or just say, for example, you borrowed somebody's mobile phone, you took somebody else's mobile phone, and then that mobile phone, it perished in your possession. Now that mobile phone, you can find it in any mobile phone store. So because there is an exact replica of that, the Islamic ruling is that you don't give him the money. You don't go to him and say, look, I lost your Sunan Abu Dawud, or your Sunan Abu Dawud ripped, here, just take £10. No. The Islamic ruling is that you need to go to the bookstore, you need to go to the bookshop, you need to go to the mobile phone shop, you need to buy that exact same mobile phone, you need to buy that exact Sunan Abu Dawud, and you need to then give it to that person. So that is the Islamic ruling. Why? Because there is an exact replica of that. However, for those things where there isn't a replica, where there isn't something similar, so just as for example, you took somebody's mobile phone and then you lost it. Now the mobile phone, it's not being manufactured anymore. Just say it was an old mobile phone, it was manufactured 2-3 years ago, but the mobile phone company, they're not manufacturing that mobile phone anymore. So therefore, in that situation, if there isn't an exact replica for that, the ruling is you will then give the money. So however much the mobile phone was worth, if it was worth £50, then you will give that person £50. So what I'm trying to say is that if you take something, or you borrowed something, and then that thing perished in your possession, or it got destroyed in your possession, or it got lost in your possession, then the guidelines given by the Sharia in compensating the individual is that if there is an exact replica available, you should buy that replica and give that to him. If the replica or if something similar cannot be found, then in that situation you will then give the money to compensate the loss which you suffered or which you gave that particular individual. So that is the ruling when it comes to lost and missing items, when it comes to perishing items. And the third topic, which I just very briefly or very quickly explain here, is with regards to items which you borrow. Now, a very common question here which people ask is that when you borrow something from someone, what is the legal ruling behind what you have, like what is the legal status of the thing which you have borrowed? Now, according to the Hanafi fiqh, it is mentioned that when you borrow something, that thing which you have borrowed is called or is considered amanat, is considered to be trust. Now, the ruling of a trust or the ruling of amanat is that if the item perished without you doing something to it, then you are not responsible for that. You don't have to give any compensation for that. However, if the item perished or it got destroyed because of your negligence or because you intentionally broke it or you intentionally destroyed it, then in that situation, you will have to give compensation for that. So just say for example, like I borrowed a pen from someone, I borrowed it, I wrote it, and I negligently left the pen behind. Or just say for example, I broke the pen, or I didn't take steps in protecting or looking after that pen. Then in that situation, because I was at fault, I will then have to compensate that brother. I will have to give him 50 pence, £1, so be it, I have to give that much. However, just say for example, I borrowed the pen and then I put it in my pocket, I put it somewhere safe, but then a thief came, he put his hand in my pocket and he took that pen. So here I wasn't at fault because I looked after the pen, I did my best, I took steps in protecting that pen. So in that situation, I don't have to give that person anything. And that is the same rule when it comes to borrowing mobile phones, when it comes to borrowing, say, laptops, when it comes to borrowing any other kind of items, iPhone or anything. As long as you took steps in protecting the item, if somebody then stole the item, somebody then, like for example, forcefully took it from you, you don't have to compensate that individual or that particular person who you took it from. However, if you borrowed something like a laptop or a mobile phone and you were negligent in protecting the item, like you took the mobile phone and you just left it there and you just went away, then if it then gets stolen, if then afterwards somebody takes it, then in that situation you will be held responsible for that. So that is the ruling when it comes to borrowing things, when it comes to ariya, that it is considered as amanat. And the ruling regarding amanat is that as long as you took means in protecting it and then afterwards it got destroyed or it got perished, then you're not considered to be responsible for that. However, if you were negligent in protecting the item, then in that situation you will be considered dhamin and you will have to give compensation for your negligence, for the negligent way you were protecting or looking after that particular item. Now, just a quick conclusion of what we discussed in today's lesson. So, there were three topics which we were looking at. Firstly, we were touching on waqf properties. So, I mentioned that when somebody, if he's got a property, if he's got a land, and he makes the intention to turn that property into a masjid, and on top of that, he puts that into practice in terms of making the entrance for the masjid, inviting brothers to come and pray namaz. So, as soon as a property becomes a masjid, then that property does not belong in his possession anymore. It now belongs in the possession of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the owner. I then mentioned the hadith from Sunan Abu Dawood, Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu saying that when that property comes into the possession of Allah, you're not allowed to sell that property, you're not allowed to give it as a gift to anyone. However, those who are responsible of that property, then they can, use the property for their benefit as long as it is reasonable. They can take wages from it as long as they're not taking too much, something which is reasonable. They would be allowed to take that. One point regarding those who are responsible people of the waqf, just keep this in mind that it is mentioned in the books of fiqh that the responsible people, they have to be such who are God-fearing people. Okay, you can't have the responsible people of a masjid doing haram or unlawful things. They themselves have to be adil. They themselves have to be, practicing on the Quran, practicing on the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If you have, say, for example, people who are selling alcohol, like restaurant owners who are selling alcohol, and then they are the trustees or the management, or they're part of the management of the masjid, then that would be wrong. That would be totally incorrect, totally against the sunnah and against the concept of Islam, because you can't be having someone doing wrong things and haram things and then he's responsible of a masjid, of an area which belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So just keep that ruling in mind. Then afterwards I then went on to talk about ghasab, or any items which is taken and then perished. So I mentioned that if a replica is found, then you will have to give that exact replica to the person. If a replica is not found, then you will have to compensate him through money. And lastly, I was talking about ariyat and things which you borrow from someone. So as I was saying, that in the Hanafi fiqh it is considered as amanat in terms of if you took reasonable steps in protecting the item or object and there afterwards it perished or it got destroyed, you're not held responsible. However, if you were negligent in fulfilling or looking after this particular property and then somebody took this property or this property got destroyed or it perished, then in that situation you will be held responsible. You will have to give compensation for that. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives tawfiq to what has been said. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillah. Any questions or